Good morning, everybody. In the studio today, we have a 2023 Aston Martin DBS, less than 1,300 miles, so it's actually in pretty good shape, but you can see here, black piano roof. There's water spots absolutely everywhere. So I wanted to go over what are minerals, why do we actually need them, why is it in our water, how does it get in our water, then when it gets on a car, what happens to the paint? And the big question is, what happens when we have a coating on it? It tends to get more water spotted. Why is that the case? So we're gonna take a very deep dive into water spots and water spot removal today on this episode of Drive and Protect. Thank you to Factor for sponsoring this episode. More on this later. Here's a quick clip from next week's episode where we find a 1965 Jaguar E-Type sitting in a driveway for over 30 years. And I dunk its rusted wire wheels in soda to see if it actually works to remove the rust. It's a really good one you're not going to want to miss, so make sure you subscribe to check it out. Somebody's living in here for sure. There's no doubt about that.
I think they vacated.
You think so?
Yeah, they didn't pay their rent last month, so they're out.
Now, as most of you know, water spots are caused by the evaporation of tiny water droplets that contain minerals, i.e. hard water that's left on your paint. But the severity of that damage can vary based on multiple things. How long it's been sitting there, the amount of minerals that are in the hard water, the type of minerals that are in there, and if the car has protection on it beforehand. Now, the big three that we're concerned with is magnesium, potassium, and calcium. So I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into why those and others are in our hose water and our drinking water in the first place. Minerals are present in drinking water primarily due to natural geological processes and human activity. As rainwater travels through rock and soil, it can dissolve minerals containing potassium, magnesium, and calcium and become part of the groundwater as it runs off into lakes and reservoirs. Likewise, some fertilizers used in farming contain those big three and lead to increased mineral in water sources through leaching and runoff as well. But all is not doom and gloom. We actually need these and other minerals to survive. Calcium for strong bones to fight osteoporosis and muscle contraction, which is obviously important to the heartbeat. Magnesium, on the other hand, is critical in our body's energy production, and you can see it sometimes sold as fitness supplements as well. Potassium is critical for electrolyte maintenance and can be helpful in avoiding muscle cramps. In other words, we need those and other minerals to grow and survive as humans. We just don't need them on our cars. Okay, so here's a quick visual representation of when you park your car next to a sprinkler. Within hour one, you have a big droplet. In that droplet are tons of minerals. By hour two, the water, this blue area here, begins to evaporate and there's more concentrated minerals on the surface. By hour three, let's say, you have all the minerals sitting on the clear coat, etching the paint. Now, this is a very good example of how you actually make sea salt. So the seawater comes in, they flatten it all out in these patties, they wait for the sun to come down, evaporate the water, and then harvest the sea salt. Same thing kind of ish happening here. So the big question is, why are those left behind minerals causing damage, causing etching to our paint? That's the question I want answered. In most cases, the reason your paint is etched is pretty basic in theory, pun intended. The combination of magnesium, potassium, and calcium, along with other minerals mixed with water, creates an alkaline solution. In other words, if I were to take an all-purpose cleaner, a high pH, and spray it on boiling hot paint, you're gonna have some issues. Now, at the same time, the paint itself is under its own stresses. You have thermal stress, you have UV stress. Now you combine that with the fact that there's little droplets of alkalinity on top of it, it's gonna cause the perfect storm. Now, alkalinity with respect to clear coat, that itself causes damage to the polymer chain. So you just have this thing on its heels and we're beating the heck out of it. That's what causes all these issues. Now, knowing that, how do we actually fix it? With respect to water spot damage and repair, there's basically three different phases. The first one is the water's sitting there and it hasn't evaporated yet. The second one is it's evaporated, but the minerals are sitting on top of the clear coat. And the third one, evaporated, but the minerals have actually burned through the clear coat. Now, in most cases in the United States, most people who wash their cars outside are doing so with hard water. So I created a product called Boost Anti-Salt Wash that has chelates in it that render the minerals inside your normal hose water inert so that it's less likely to cause that damage. So if we focus in on phase one, you can see that the water hasn't evaporated yet. So speed is your friend. On the flip side though, you have to do this in a way that adds lubrication because you have little rocks, you have little minerals in there. So phase one is pretty simple. It's about speed. So let me show you how to wipe it off properly without causing further damage. Okay, with that being said, we have a lot of water spots to remove, but first, it's time for lunch. What I do is I get Factor delivered right to the studio. I run it upstairs, and 2 minutes later, I have a gourmet meal with the calories I need to keep me polishing and running my business. Now, the really cool part about Factor is they have 35 plus options and 45 plus add-ons, including cold pressed juices, protein shakes, and chocolate or peanut butter keto cookies. And they have smoothies. I love my smoothies. I actually put it right over there. And in between detailing, I pound it. It tastes really great. Plus, they have things like keto, calorie smart, chef's choice, vegan, and my favorite, Protein Plus. Head over to factor75.com or click the link below and use code AMMO50 for 50% off your first order and 20% off your next month's order. Now, back to the DBS. In this case, wipe the surprise rain or sprinkler as soon as possible with a microfiber towel, spit, or hydrate to safely remove the minerals. Remember, you need lubrication because you're wiping little rocks off your paint. In other words, if you're trying to avoid etching, but in that process put scratches in your paint, you're going to lose your mind. Now, phase 2 is pretty interesting, and it's probably the most common form of water spots. What happens is you drive to work, let's say, car looks absolutely fantastic, you park it outside, you didn't realize there was a sprinkler there, you come out at the end of the day, everything's dried, and you have watermarks. In other words, it hasn't been sitting for multiple days. You've already pulled your hair out, you're freaking out, and you have to try to minimize this damage. So one thing people use is white distilled vinegar mixed 50-50 in water, and they spray it down. I have some right here. You spray it on the paint, and this is an acid or a mild form of an acid. Now, typically you let it sit for a while, maybe 10-15 minutes, but you want to keep it wet as possible, right? Wet, 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 wet. And then as you're letting it sit there, you can slowly start to wipe and see if it's eating away, chewing away at the minerals. Now, in my experience, I haven't found a whole ton of success with this. The reason why is you are diluting the acid, in other words, the vinegar, and it doesn't necessarily seem to work the best. Now, the second thing that you can do in phase 2 is use a clay bar. Now, the clay bar is going to remove that top layer of minerals, but if it starts to penetrate in terms of etching, you're not going to be able to remove the etch marks with the clay. The reason I don't necessarily always use that as well is if you have paint that's incredibly soft like this one here, which causes a lot more of the watermarks, it tends to mar or scratch that surface anyways, which requires you to go back in and polish. So for phase 3, when it's actually etched through, we're gonna polish. I typically use a light polish on phase 2 and 3, if that makes sense. So usually I'll take a quick gander right now. I always have white distilled vinegar for cleaning the inside and sanitizing, disinfecting, that kind of thing. I'll leave it on the paint and just see if I get lucky. This is usually a very small, yeah, you can smell it. This is usually a very small window that this actually works. So I don't have super high hopes for it. And in this case, because it's been sitting a long time, chances are we're gonna have to polish it for phase 3. First, clean the area, then prime a straight cut waffle pad with exfoliate polish by hand and add 2 dots. Polish on speed 3 or so and watch the paint closely to see exactly when those spots are removed. In most cases, it's pretty quick. Once everything's removed, move to the next spot, but be sure to blow out your pad frequently in case you get a buildup of minerals in the foam. If for some reason the foam isn't working, then move to a wool pad and eventually sanding if necessary. But if you do decide to sand, email me first to discuss. Okay, after about a minute or 2 of polishing, you can see the differences night and day, and it was super simple to do, and it took almost no time. So what's my point? If you're not working in phase 1 where you can just quickly wipe it down and no harm, no foul, when you're in phase 2 or 3, I like to immediately jump to polishing. If you don't want to use any of the machines back there, you can actually do it by hand as well. Now, the upside to doing that is if you're not using a chemical, you're not introducing something that could potentially harm the car, potentially harm you. Those are good chemicals. I'm just saying, have that in the back of your mind. You know what? Maybe I should just jump to a polish and see how that works. The irony is if you actually use the chemicals and they do work, I'm encouraging you to then re-polish the paint anyways, because you are kind of beating it up. You're kind of zapping it with all these stronger, higher, lower pHs, whatever you decide to use. In this case, you'd be using a lower pH with this water spot remover. And so you want to refurbish everything. You want to kind of rejuvenate it and then go back in and put a coating on it. So I have about another 20 minutes left of polishing the rest of this. And then, like I said, put the coating on. Now, earlier in the episode, I mentioned there is this phenomenon. Whenever you have a coating on a car, you tend to get more water spots. I have a theory on that as well that we're going to talk about right after I clean this up. Once all the spots were removed, replace your coating or your wax to match the rest of the car. Now the water spots are gone, the coating is on, and it looks absolutely fantastic. Now with respect to the coating, as promised, most people believe that the coating causes more water spots, and by default I think it does, but I think the idea of how it gets there might be wrong. So the original thought was you have these tiny little beads everywhere. Those beads act as prisms. Those prisms then capture the sun's light and then like basically burn into the paint because it's causing the refraction of light. And I thought, okay, that's fairly logical. But the more I thought about it and the more I was reading about it, if you think about a magnifying glass as a kid, right? You hold the magnifying glass up like this or whatever, and the wood's down here, and you're burning a hole or burning your name into wood. You don't necessarily put the magnifying glass against the wood. You have to have it above a little bit. So in that theory, you'd have to take those little tiny beads and elevate them above the paint, have the sun go through, the prism cause the refraction of light, and then actually burn through. So to me, I don't know if that's necessarily true. I don't know enough. I'm just saying that's my theory. If you guys have a comment, leave that down below. But to me, something sounds weird. My theory is the fact that there's more water spots on beading is caused from the fact that the beads are really tiny. There's billions of little beads versus when there's no wax, no coating, no protection on it, and you have those big blotchy areas. Those big blotchy areas contain lots of water, and it takes more time for that to evaporate, in my theory. When you have tiny thousands, billions of little beads, that water evaporates much faster. Thus, you have less time to wipe it off. Thus, you have more, in theory, water spots because you have a coating on it. As always, guys, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, you know where to find me, Larry at ammonyc.com, or visit me on my Instagram page, ammonyc. Thanks for watching. Hope this helped. Talk soon.